Looking through the viewfinder and crossing the threshold of the unknown, we uncover stories hidden in plain sight. Experience the profound moments of discovery that altered the course of human history.
Step out here, right now.
I'm fine where I am. You haven't told me why you're here.
I said step outside. Don't make this harder than it needs to be.
Without a warrant, you don't come in my house. Fourth Amendment. I'm not stepping out.
Last chance.
Officer Scott Harlan, badge number 6129 of the Riverside County Police Department, made the worst decision of his 11-year career when he saw a black man doing yard work in an upscale neighborhood and decided something didn't look right. He circled back 10 minutes later, approached the house with his hand near his weapon, and when Derek Vaughn answered to his own front door, Harlan demanded he step outside for questioning without any legal justification. When Derek, a retired sheriff's deputy with 22 years of service, calmly refused and cited his Fourth Amendment rights, Harlan forced his way into the doorway and deployed his taser, sending 50,000 volts through Derek's body while he stood in his own entryway. What Harlan didn't know was that the Ring doorbell camera had captured every second in crystal clear HD with perfect audio, that this footage would go viral within 48 hours, and that his moment of racial bias would lead to a $6.8 million lawsuit that would bankrupt not just him, but his entire family. Before we go further, what city or country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing where you're tuning in from. If you believe no one should be tased at their own front door for simply asserting their rights, then make sure you like this video and subscribe. Derek Vaughn had spent his entire Saturday afternoon doing something he had dreamed about for years. At 48 years old, after 22 years as a county sheriff's deputy, he had finally retired with full pension and bought the house he had always wanted. The two-story home in the Riverside Meadows neighborhood was everything he and his wife Nicole had saved for. They had closed on the property just 2 weeks earlier, and Derek was still in that excited phase where every task felt meaningful. Mowing the lawn wasn't a chore. It was taking care of his investment. Trimming the hedges wasn't work. It was making his new home beautiful. He had spent the afternoon outside in old jeans and a faded t-shirt, pushing the mower across the front yard, edging the walkway, cleaning up the flower beds that the previous owners had let grow wild. The September sun was warm but not unbearable, and Derek worked steadily, occasionally waving at neighbors he was just beginning to meet. A white couple 2 houses down had introduced themselves the previous weekend. An elderly woman across the street had brought over cookies as a welcome gift. The neighborhood felt safe, quiet, exactly what Derek and Nicole had wanted for this next chapter of their lives. His sheriff's department career had been demanding, sometimes dangerous, always stressful. He had worked patrol, served warrants, handled domestic violence calls, dealt with the worst aspects of human behavior for over 2 decades. This house, this neighborhood, this peaceful Saturday afternoon represented everything he had earned. Around 4 in the afternoon, Derek finished the yard work and headed inside through the front door. His white Ford F-150 sat in the driveway, lawn equipment scattered near the garage, grass clippings still visible on the walkway where he planned to sweep them up after grabbing some water. Inside the house, Nicole was in the kitchen preparing dinner, and the smell of seasoned chicken filled the air. Derek washed his hands at the kitchen sink, dried them on a towel, and was reaching into the refrigerator for a cold bottle of water, when he heard the loud, aggressive knocking on the front door. The knocking wasn't polite. It wasn't the gentle tap of a neighbor stopping by. It was the heavy, authoritative pounding that Derek recognized immediately from his years in law enforcement. Someone was at his door, and they wanted attention right now. Derek walked to the front door, glanced at his phone to check the Ring doorbell app, and saw a Riverside County police officer standing on his porch. The officer's hand was resting near his duty belt, his posture tense and ready. Derek felt a flicker of confusion but no real concern. Maybe there was an incident in the neighborhood. Maybe they were canvassing for witnesses to something. He opened the door with the casual confidence of someone who had worn the same uniform for most of his adult life. Officer Scott Harlan had been patrolling the Riverside Meadows area for the past hour, driving slowly through streets he considered his territory. At 37 years old with 11 years on the force, Harlan had developed what he called instincts about people and places. Those instincts had generated 14 civilian complaints over his career, most of them alleging racial profiling or excessive force. Internal Affairs had reviewed 8 of those complaints and found patterns that concerned some supervisors, but Harlan had never faced serious discipline. He knew how to write reports that justified his actions, knew which supervisors would back him up, and knew that most complaints disappeared into administrative files without consequences. When Harlan had driven past the house on Oakmont Drive and seen a black man mowing the lawn, something in his mind flagged it as wrong. The neighborhood was predominantly white, The house is expensive. And the image of a black man doing yard work triggered an assumption Harlan didn't even consciously recognize as racist. He thought the man might be a landscaper, or maybe someone casing the house, or possibly a squatter who had moved into a vacant property. The possibility that the man simply lived there and was taking care of his own lawn didn't register as likely in Harlan's worldview. Harlan had circled the block and come back around 10 minutes later. The lawnmower was still in the driveway, but the man was gone. Harlan parked his patrol car at the curb, studied the house for a moment, and decided to make contact. He approached the front door with the confidence of someone who believed his badge gave him the right to question anyone about anything. When Derek opened the door, Harlan saw exactly what he expected to see: a black man who looked like he had been doing physical labor, standing in a house that Harlan assumed he didn't belong in. "Step outside," Harlan said, his voice carrying the flat authority of command rather than a request. Derek blinked, surprised by the tone. "Officer, can I help you? What's this about?" "I said step outside," Harlan repeated, his hand moving closer to his taser. "Don't make me ask again." Derek's confusion deepened, but his training kicked in automatically. He kept his hands visible, his voice calm, his body language non-threatening. "This is my house, officer. Can you tell me why you need me to step outside?" Harlan's eyes narrowed. "I saw someone matching your description outside this residence earlier. I need to verify you have a right to be here." "You saw me," Derek said evenly. "I was doing yard work. I live here. This is my property." "Then you won't mind stepping outside so I can verify that," Harlan said, and the way he said it made clear he didn't believe Derek at all. Derek felt the familiar weight of something he had experienced before, but never quite like this. He had been pulled over for driving while black. He had been followed in stores. He had felt the sting of assumptions based on his skin color. But standing in the doorway of his own home, being ordered outside by an officer who saw him as a threat rather than a homeowner, carried a different kind of violation. He had spent 22 years as a deputy. He knew the law. He knew his rights. And he knew that what Harlan was demanding had no legal basis. "Officer, I'm going to need you to explain what reasonable suspicion you have that justifies this detention," Derek said, using the precise legal language he had learned decades ago. "I haven't committed a crime. I'm standing in my own doorway. You need probable cause to detain me, and you need a warrant to enter my home." The words hit Harlan like a challenge, and his face flushed with the irritation. Most people didn't talk to him like that. Most people didn't quote legal standards at him. Most people just complied, and their compliance confirmed his authority. Derek's calm refusal felt like disrespect, felt like resistance, felt like exactly the kind of behavior that Harlan had been trained to shut down immediately. "This is your last warning," Harlan said, his hand now gripping his taser. "Step outside or I'm coming in to get you." Derek's pulse quickened, but his voice remained steady. "You don't have a warrant. You can't enter my home without probable cause. I'm a retired sheriff's deputy. I know the law, and what you're doing right now is illegal." Above them both, mounted beside the front door, the Ring doorbell camera recorded everything in perfect high definition. Every word, every gesture, every moment of what was about to become the worst mistake of Scott Harlan's life. Harlan's grip tightened on his taser, and his face showed the kind of anger that came from someone who wasn't used to being told no. He had expected immediate compliance, the kind of fearful obedience he got from most people when he showed up in uniform with his hand near a weapon. Instead, Derek stood in his doorway, calm and composed, speaking to him like an equal rather than a suspect. That confidence, that refusal to submit, made Harlan more determined to assert control. "I don't care if you say you're a retired deputy," Harlan said, his voice rising. "Right now you're refusing a lawful order, and that makes you a problem I need to deal with." Derek kept his hands visible at his sides, making sure Harlan could see he wasn't reaching for anything. "Officer, there's no lawful order here. You saw me doing the yard work at my own house. You have no call for service, no complaint, no probable cause. I'm asking you one more time to leave my property." From inside the house, Nicole appeared in the hallway behind Derek. She had heard the raised voices and came to see what was happening. When she saw the police officer at their door with his hand on a weapon, her stomach dropped. "Derek, what's going on?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. Harlan's attention snapped to Nicole. "Ma'am, is this your residence?" Nicole moved closer to Derek, standing beside him in the doorway. "Yes, this is our house. We just moved in 2 weeks ago. What's the problem?" "I need to verify that," Harlan said. "I need both of you to step outside so I can confirm you live here." Nicole looked at Derek, confused and scared. Derek put a gentle hand on her shoulder. We don't have to step outside, Nicole. This officer has no legal reason to detain us. He looked back at Harlan. Officer, my wife and I are happy to show you our identification, our mortgage papers, our deed, anything you need to verify ownership. But we're going to do that from inside our own home because you have no authority to make us come outside. Harlan felt his control of the situation slipping away, and that feeling made him angrier. He had pulled this same routine dozens of times before, demanding compliance and getting it, because most people were too afraid or too uninformed to push back. But Derek knew the law as well as Harlan did, maybe better. And that knowledge was protecting him in ways that infuriated the officer standing on his porch. You've got 3 seconds to step outside, Harlan said, pulling his taser from its holster and holding it at his side. 3, 2. Nicole gasped, grabbing Derek's arm. Just do what he says, please. Derek didn't move. He kept his eyes on Harlan, his voice steady, despite the weapon now visible in the officer's hand. I'm not stepping outside. You're threatening me with a weapon on my own property without cause. Everything you're doing right now is illegal, and you need to leave. Harlan took a step forward, closing the distance between himself and the doorway. 1. When Derek still didn't move, Harlan made his decision. He stepped into the doorway, pushing past the threshold into the house. Derek instinctively moved backward to avoid physical contact, his hands still visible and open. You're entering my home without a warrant, Derek said clearly, making sure his words would be heard on any recording. I do not give you permission to enter. You're under arrest for obstruction, Harlan announced, reaching for Derek's arm. Derek pulled back, not aggressively but defensively, keeping space between himself and the officer. I'm not resisting. I'm not threatening you. I'm standing in my own home. Nicole screamed as Harlan raised the taser and pointed it directly at Derek's chest. Get on the ground now! I'm not getting on the ground in my own house, Derek said, his voice firm but not hostile. I haven't committed a crime. Harlan didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger, and the taser fired with a sharp crack that echoed through the entryway. The 2 metal probes shot out, trailing thin wires, and embedded themselves in Derek's chest. 50,000 volts of electricity surged through his body, and every muscle locked up in painful spasm. Derek collapsed backward onto the hardwood floor of his own home, his body convulsing as the current continued to flow. Nicole's screams filled the house as she dropped to her knees beside him, trying to help but not knowing what to do. Harlan rushed forward, flipped Derek onto his stomach while he was still incapacitated from the taser, and wrenched his arms behind his back. The metal handcuffs clicked into place around Derek's wrists, tight enough to bite into his skin. The taser probes were still embedded in his chest, the wires still attached, and Derek lay face down on his own floor, handcuffed and struggling to catch his breath. You just assaulted me in my own home, Derek managed to say, his voice weak and strained. You had no cause, no warrant, nothing. Harlan keyed his radio with one hand while keeping pressure on Derek's back with the other. Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I've deployed taser and have 1 subject in custody. Send back up to 2847 Oakmont Drive. Outside, a neighbor 3 houses down had heard Nicole's screams and was already on the phone with 911, describing what he could see through the open front door. Another neighbor stood on her porch with her phone out, not recording but ready to call for help if needed. And mounted beside the doorframe, the Ring camera that neither Harlan nor Derek had thought about in the chaos of the confrontation continued recording every second in perfect clarity, capturing the moment that would destroy Scott Harlan's career and bankrupt his entire family. 2 patrol cars arrived within 4 minutes, lights flashing but no sirens in the quiet suburban neighborhood. Sergeant Patricia Monroe stepped out of the first vehicle, a 26-year veteran with silver streaks in her dark hair and the tired eyes of someone who had seen every kind of police call imaginable. She walked up the driveway and through the open front door, taking in the scene immediately. A black man lay handcuffed face down on the hardwood floor with taser probes still embedded in his chest. A black woman knelt beside him crying. Officer Scott Harlan stood over them both, breathing hard, his hands still on his taser. What happened here? Monroe asked, her voice sharp and controlled. Harlan straightened up, trying to regain his composure. Suspicious person call, Sergeant. Subject refused lawful orders, became aggressive when I tried to make contact, had to deploy taser to gain compliance. Monroe looked out around the entryway at the family photos already hung on the walls, the mail on the side table addressed to this house, the shoes lined up neatly by the door. Suspicious person? This is clearly a residence. Did you verify who lives here before you engaged? Subject matched the description of someone I observed earlier acting suspiciously in the area, Harlan said, and even as the words left his mouth, he knew how thin they sounded. Monroe turned to Nicole, who was still kneeling beside Derek. Ma'am, what's your name? Nicole Vaughn, she said through tears. This is my husband, Derek. We live here. We own this house. He was doing yard work and this officer came to our door and attacked him for no reason. Monroe knelt down beside Derek, her expression hardening as she examined the taser probe still in his chest. Sir, I'm going to have the medics remove these and check you out. Can you tell me what happened from your perspective? Derek's voice was strained, but clear. I was doing yard work at my own house this afternoon. I came inside about 10 minutes before Officer Harlan knocked on my door. He demanded I step outside without telling me why. When I asked for legal justification, he threatened me. When I refused to leave my own doorway, he forced entry into my home and tased me. Monroe stood up slowly and looked at Harlan with an expression that made clear she knew something was very wrong with his story. Officer Harlan, did you have a warrant? No, ma'am, but I had probable cause based on suspicious activity. What suspicious activity? Be specific. Harlan hesitated, and in that hesitation Monroe saw the truth. There was no suspicious activity. There was only assumption and bias and an officer who had made a catastrophically bad decision. She pulled out her radio and called for paramedics, then turned back to Derek. Sir, I need to see identification and proof you live at this residence. Nicole jumped up and ran to the kitchen, returning with Derek's wallet and a folder of documents. Monroe examined the driver's license, which showed this exact address. She looked through the mortgage papers, the deed, the utility bills, all in the names Derek and Nicole Vaughn. Everything was legitimate and current. She looked at Harlan, and her voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. Officer Harlan, this man owns this house. Why did you tase him? Before Harlan could answer, Monroe asked Derek, the question that would change everything. Sir, what's your occupation? Derek looked up from the floor, his face still showing the pain from the taser strike. I'm retired law enforcement. County Sheriff's Department, 22 years of service, badge number 2847. The room went completely silent. Monroe's face lost all color. The two backup officers who had entered behind her froze in place. Harlan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. You're telling me you're former law enforcement? Monroe asked quietly. Retired 3 years ago, Derek said, his voice gaining strength now. I know use of force policy. I know what constitutes illegal entry. I know what excessive force looks like. And I know every second of this is recorded on my Ring doorbell camera. Everyone's eyes moved to the small device mounted beside the front door, its tiny light still blinking. Monroe closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them, she looked at Harlan with something close to disgust. You tased a retired deputy in his own home, and it's all on video? Derek continued, his voice cold and precise. Officer Harlan had no call for service, no complaint, no probable cause. He saw me doing yard work, made an assumption based on my race, came back after I went inside, demanded I exit my home without justification, and when I asserted my Fourth Amendment rights, he forced entry and used a weapon on me. Everything from the moment he knocked is recorded in high definition with clear audio. Nicole pulled out her phone and opened the Ring app, turning the screen toward Monroe. The footage showed everything. Harlan's aggressive approach, his demands, his threats, Derek's calm responses, the illegal entry, the taser deployment. All of it captured perfectly. Monroe immediately pulled Harlan aside and spoke in a harsh whisper that Derek could still hear. Don't say another word. I'm calling the chief right now, and you need to understand your career just ended. Derek looked up at Harlan from his position on the floor, still handcuffed, taser probes still in his chest. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 22 years wearing the same uniform Harlan wore now. I spent 2 decades serving this community with honor. I know exactly what you did wrong. I know exactly what policies you violated, and I know exactly what happens next. You're done, Officer Harlan. And when I'm finished, you won't just lose your badge. You'll lose everything. By Monday morning, the Ring doorbell footage had been viewed 8 million times. Derek had released it publicly Sunday afternoon after consulting with his attorney, and the video spread across social media like wildfire. News outlets picked it up within hours. National networks ran segments showing the clear footage of Officer Scott Harlan tasing a retired deputy in his own doorway. The public outrage was immediate and massive. Scott Harlan was suspended without pay by Monday at 9 in the morning. The police chief held a press conference at noon, apologizing to Derek and promising a full investigation, but the damage was already done. The footage was everywhere, and no amount of damage control could change what millions of people had watched with their own eyes. Derek filed his federal lawsuit on Tuesday morning. His attorney laid out the charges with surgical precision. Illegal entry without a warrant, excessive force without justification, battery, assault, violation of civil rights under color of law, intentional infliction of emotional distress. The lawsuit named Officer Scott Harlan personally and demanded $6.8 million in damages. Because Harlan was named as an individual defendant, his personal assets were now at risk. The internal affairs investigation took 3 weeks and found what everyone already knew. Harlan had no legal basis for the stop. No call for service existed. No complaint had been filed. No suspicious activity had been reported. Harlan had seen a black man doing yard work in an upscale neighborhood and made an assumption based entirely on race. The investigation also uncovered Harlan's history of complaints, 14 total over 11 years, with 11 of them involving minorities. 8 included allegations of excessive force. The pattern was undeniable and damning. The police department settled their portion of the lawsuit for $4 million 6 months later. But Derek's attorney pursued Harlan personally for the remaining $2.8 million, and that's where the real destruction began. Harlan had roughly $350,000 in total assets. His house had about $200,000 in equity. He had $90,000 in retirement savings. He had $60,000 in other accounts and investments. It wasn't nearly enough to cover the judgment against him. Harlan tried to file for bankruptcy, but the court blocked it. Judgments from intentional torts like assault and civil rights violations often cannot be discharged in bankruptcy. The court ordered the seizure of his assets. His house was sold. His retirement accounts were emptied. His savings were taken. And because he was married, his wife's jointly held assets were also attached to satisfy the judgment. Jennifer Harlan had been married to Scott for 16 years. She lost her home, her financial security, and her future in a matter of months. The college fund they had saved for their 2 teenage children was seized. Her car was repossessed because the loan was in both their names. By month 8, she filed for divorce and took what little remained. The kids, aged 15 and 13, were humiliated at school when classmates showed them the viral video of their father tasing an innocent man. They barely spoke to him anymore. The criminal charges came next. The district attorney filed state charges for assault, battery, and illegal entry. Harlan was convicted on all counts after a 3-day trial where the ring footage played on loop for the jury. He was sentenced to 18 months in county jail and 3 years probation. He served 14 months and was released as a convicted felon who could never work in law enforcement again. At 40 years old, Scott Harlan found himself working in a warehouse for $14 an hour. His wages were garnished to pay the remaining judgment. In 5 years, he had paid $412,000 of the $2.8 million he owed. He would be making payments for the rest of his life. He lived in a small 1-bedroom apartment, saw his children maybe twice a year, and watched his ex-wife rebuild a life that didn't include him. Derek and Nicole still lived in their home on Oakmont Drive. Derek became an advocate for police reform and body camera accountability. He traveled to police departments across the state showing the ring footage as a training example of what happens when officers let bias override law. When reporters asked him if he felt vindicated by the lawsuit victory, he gave the same answer every time. I didn't want to be vindicated. I wanted to do yard work at my own house without being treated like a criminal. But if my experience can change how officers think before they act, if it can save someone else from being tased in their own doorway, then maybe something good came from something terrible. The footage remained online, a permanent record of how 10 minutes of racial bias destroyed one man's career and bankrupted his entire family while traumatizing another man in his own home. Scott Harlan would spend the rest of his life paying for those 10 minutes, one garnished paycheck at a time, in a warehouse far from the badge and authority he once abused. The lesson was brutal and simple. The camera sees everything. The law protects everyone, and consequences, when they finally come, can take absolutely everything you have. This story proves that accountability is possible when evidence is undeniable. If you know someone who needs to see how one moment of bias can destroy lives on both sides of the badge, share this video now. What reforms do you think could have prevented this? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because this conversation matters. And if you believe technology is changing how justice works in America, hit subscribe because we're bringing you more stories where the truth gets caught on camera and nobody walks away the same.
Archives do significantly more than just preserve the past. They softly whisper the intricate stories of our world. Each story is a necessary fragment of a larger truth. Thank you for choosing to seek that truth alongside our dedicated team.